working on. My face has gone a bit round because unfortunately I ate a bit too much this week and I've not been walking enough. So pray for me to do a bit more walking. Um, but anyway, peace and blessings in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is and was to come. Your mind to me from him. I'm gonna go for a very, very long walk, hopefully, if I've got time. Uh but yeah, so I was gonna speak on I think not far away anyway. So yeah, I was gonna speak on conceptualizing God. All right. Hey, how you doing, LW Truth? How's things? How's the family, man? Um, how's your life, man? The t-shirt I'm wearing, this is not cannabis, by the way. Um, I've actually thought about it and I thought, well, is that cannabis? I really do hope it's not cannabis because I don't smoke cannabis. So yeah. I have struggled. I can tell you a good few stories, but one was when I was 12. I stupidly took cannabis, right? When I was around the age of 12. Uh, I was in a care home and I basically was given a praying for the 4th of July. Oh yeah, because you guys in America, you've got the 4th of July thing. Oh, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, Amy's doing fine. She's just, you know, doing a law as well. But anyway, what was I going to say? So when I was younger, I actually, around the age of 12, obviously I'm 31 now, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I used to watch this TV program called the Baby Looney Tunes. Now I was 12, so I mean it's not you're not talking about the big man John you're seeing. You're talking about a very young little boy, and I actually was given some weed. This weed was laced with a tiny bit of coke, and I didn't know that. It was given to me by a 14-year-old resident of the care home I was in. This was in South London, and what essentially happened is I'm smoking this because I asked him to smoke it because I obviously, long story short, when I was in care, uh, I had bouts of depression, and so I would essentially go into bouts of depression and start crying for my mother, start crying for the fact that I'm not with her, stuff like that. And I thought the best way to resolve this would be to smoke weed. So I would occasionally do it, not a lot, but when the older boys were in, I would occasionally just ask them for like a smoke, and I would get a bit lightheaded, but nothing like I felt when I smoked that weed. And so what happens is I'm watching this Baby Looney Tunes program, and I'm like 12. I'm sitting on my bed. I've puffed at least a few drawers of this stuff in a roll up he's given me, and my heart starts pacing. My heart is like, "Boo, boo, 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 boo," and I'm crying. I'm literally screaming at the age of 12, thinking I'm going to die. Everything's gone blurry, obviously because I can't handle weed. It looks like, and which is a good thing anyway. I mean, who would boast about being able to handle weed, right? But I can't. I mean, so my heart starts bumping really fast, and I just laid on the floor. I'm hearing this cartoon going off, and I'm seeing the images on of the program move around. This program was Baby Looney Tunes. I watched it all the time, and it just moved around. It was like weird and lucid. And so yeah, what then happened is I ended up being taken by my carers at the time. They took me to the hospital, and yeah, thankfully the doctors didn't find anything wrong with me. They did, however, tell me to stop taking weed, and I wouldn't take weed until the age of 18. I'll tell you something about that. Uh, so when I was 18, I took it again. My cousin, who unfortunately was smoking it, there's a Catholic non group out there that's indulging in cannabis from joints to tobacco rolls, snacks, all of it. Still don't know what to think if it's legal in America. Yeah, weed induces paranoia. My experience of weed, of course, not going to be the same as everybody else's, but generally speaking, what the medical professionals say is it induces paranoia. It obviously is, you know, a sort of down drug. It makes you sleepy. It makes you tired. It makes you tired. It makes you sleepy. That's what it does. And so, when you take these substances, you're actually, engaging in some sort of like I don't know what to call it. What do you call it? When a drug makes you on a down, I just call it a downer drug. So, basically, yeah, I was when I was 18, my cousin wanted to buy some. So I basically gave him money. I shouldn't have done this, but I was 18 and I wasn't a Christian. I became a Christian at the age of 25. So at the age of 18, my my cousin, he was asking me for weed, and I said, "Okay, cool. Give you a tenner. You can buy it." He buys it, and he offers me a roll up. Well, we can talk about not believing in the creator. We can talk about that in a bit. I just want to finish the story. So he buys me a roll up. So sorry, he fills my roll up, and he gives me the weed. I smoke it again. This is the second time in my life. Well, actually, the fifth time because I did it a few times when I was younger, but it didn't go as hard. This one was also laced with cocaine, and I smoked that. And let's just say I tried to jump off a bridge because of it. Well, not a bridge. I tried to jump off the railing of my cousin's house. This was, over in Norbury, and this was around the fifth floor of what was a block of flats. And I tried to jump off of it. You know, Obviously, by the grace of God, I'm not 18 anymore. I'm 31. Don't do stupid stuff like that. But yes, but I'm just saying that's what substance abuse does. It makes you do stupid stuff. And so yeah, I remember my legs felt numb, and at first I was laughing. Then I started crying again. And bear in mind, I'm older than my cousin and and my younger cousin, his friend. And they're all laughing at me, and I'm just there crying. And he walks up to this girl, I remember, and yeah, this woman is looking at me saying, "What's wrong with him?" And my legs are just trembling, like because I'm not being still. It was luckily they were there because when I tried to jump off the railing, they actually dropped me on the floor, pulled me off, dropped me on the floor, and stopped me. So, but yeah, I would never smoke weed again. I never smoke any drugs. I don't do that stuff. I stopped smoking at the age of 25, around the time I became a Christian, and I'm not looking back at that stuff. But anyway, so speaking about God, so conceptualizing God, I'm just going to speak about that now. And so, you know, when people say they don't believe in a creator, the question that ex-atheist, uh, I think his name's Richard something, but yeah, he has a whole book on this. It's called, you know, uh, There Is a God, right? And I'd have to get up if I've got it in my bag. Let me just get up for you. His name's not Richard, by the way. I think it's something else. But I was just reading this again because I really like the book. Sorry, it's not Richard. It's Anthony Flew. So the question Anthony Flew asks in this book is, well, what if you were able to conceive of a God? What would a God be? A lot of people say that, well, the creator cannot exist. Well, if I can conceptualize a maximally great being, you know, who has great making properties, let's say a being that has the ability to make things, if I can conceptualize that, let's just see how far it goes, right? So I want to speak about first conceptualization. What is conceptualization? Well, it's the ability to, you know, you know, be able to from your mind, be able to come up with a thing. Now, for example, I can imagine a flying dinosaur. I can imagine a flying dinosaur, but I can't imagine a dinosaur that is that has, still tissue. So let's just think about contradictions first. I'll speak about conceptualization first, then contradictions. So, contradictions would be like this: a married bachelor. So, can we conceive of a married bachelor? Is it possible to conceive of a married bachelor? No. We would say in the general sense that bachelors are not married, and so both those things would be a contradiction because P cannot be P at the same time. Sorry, not P cannot be P at the same time. That would be a contradiction. So imagine you've got a roll of tissue. Imagine in your mind a roll of tissue. Now then imagine in your mind that roll of tissue being still, made out of still properties, and yet still being tissue. You may be able to imagine a roll of steel, but you won't be able to imagine a roll of still tissue because your brain does not conceptualize still being tissue at the same time, right? So follow me, follow me. So there are things that are logically incoherent. This is what uh, you know, I think his name's yeah. I keep mentioning Richard because I know who I'm talking about. Uh, it's not Rupert Sheldrake. I'm forgetting his name. But there's this concept that a famous theologian states about conceptualizing. And what does conceptualizing mean? If I was to say there's a still tissue, that would be formally a contradiction because steel and tissue have different properties. You can imagine a roll of steel, you can imagine a roll of tissue. You can't imagine both, you know. So, if you can't imagine both, the question is, can you conceptualize of something that has great making properties, something that is objective, something that can make the universe? This is where, you know, the conversation extends to more of a, and this is where obviously Anthony Flew asks the question of, well, what would God be if you were able to conceptualize him? And the reason why he asks that question is because ultimately the atheist is doing something. They are assuming within their mind, within their worldview, they're assuming that great making properties cannot exist. So there can't be something that is foundational and grounds all things. They will not allow for that to occur. But the thing is, that would not be a logically incoherent claim. So one, the atheist has to, in order to defeat the idea of God's existence, the atheist has to prove that God breaks the law of non-contradiction. And what I'm talking about is just in a general sense. Like, I'm talking about that God being the ground of all things and being necessary, that itself would break the law of non-contradiction. Well, I mean, I would say this to you. You say I can't conceptualize a God. I would say to you, imagine a maximally great being. Would a maximally great being with all great making properties be a contradiction? And explain how a maximally great being will be a contradiction. Because if you tell me you cannot conceptualize, I will say, Bokum, you can. I just mentioned one thing you can conceptualize of. So you can conceptualize of, for example, a bachelor. If I said, what is a bachelor? You'll be able to generally tell me what a bachelor is. If I said, what's a married man? You'll be able to tell me what a married man is. If I told you to imagine a married bachelor, would you be able to conceptualize that? No, because two of those properties would contradict. So, if you say that this is a contradiction, logically speaking, and it's unconceptualized, then it's obviously something that doesn't have grounding. But if I can conceptualize a maximal great being that creates all things, and that if that from that there is no logical contradiction, then it's very possible, and we're talking about possibility now, we'll be going to the realm of probability later. It's very possible that God exists. So if you tell me you cannot conceptualize of a God existing, then I'd ask you to simply give a definitive argument how it can be, how is it going to be impossible that a great making being with great making properties, and when I say great making being, what I'm saying is a being with the ability to not only exist external to the human mind, but also to create other things. Okay, explain it. You know, but whilst you're concocting an argument, I just want to add, all right? Human beings already, unless you're rational, human beings already are able to conceptualize of a being outside of themselves. We do it every single day. If a human being told me, well, I can't conceive of a being outside of myself, then you either were just born yesterday, or you've got some sort of mental illness. Because rabbits are beings outside of ourselves, animals are beings outside of ourselves. So human beings can conceive of beings that exist outside ourselves. We don't need to assume that isn't the case from what we can observe in this sort of empirical realm of study, right? And so what I'm then doing is taking this concept and I'm saying, well, can we conceptualize of a God or a being that has great making properties that is the ground of all things that begin to exist? You know, so that would be a thing to think about. Also, if you say there's no ground that necessitates all things exist, can you explain why it's the case that majority of things have grounds? Like, for example, if we were to see a tree, for example, a tree comes from a seed, seeds come from the ground. Why would that be the case? Okay, I think we lost good faith conversation. Well, I didn't call anybody stupid. You just didn't define it. How can you define God as human? Why would you insist on implying? I didn't imply any human attributes at all. You didn't listen to what I said, so I didn't do that. All I'm doing is conceptualizing the idea. of a great being, a great making being with great making properties. If I can conceptualize that, if I can visualize that, then the possibility of God existing goes up. This is why philosophy works, because it really deals with how we're observing the world. You see, people who are atheists unfortunately claim, well, the only realm of sort of evidentialism is going to be science. Well, I'd say, well, how do you know science works? Because you're using philosophy. What's philosophy? It's philosophia. It's the love of wisdom. If you didn't use your mind and you weren't able to, of course, put A and B together, then ultimately science wouldn't work. Because science isn't just a baby putting building blocks together, but it's more than that. It's the ability to be able to conceptualize, using various means and methods, a determinant of whether this theory works, or whether this chemical will be able to co-communicate with this chemical or not. You know, oh, glass body, thank you. Um, I would say these things are something to think about if you are an atheist, because atheism has a burden of proof, and this is where I say, what is the burden of proof of atheism? What do you mean? I mean, well, atheism is an ideology. The atheist says, well, it's just a negation of your worldview, but it isn't, because if you negate a worldview, there is a God. You're going to have to explain how properties like morality or properties like logic or reason or minds functioning work. And that of course leans on a transcendental argument, which I've already dealt with. Um, I mean, Jeffrey, people can say they're a devout Christian and do stupid stuff, dude. Uh, I think you should know by now. I've been watching my channel that people can call themselves Christians and not be Christians. I don't know this woman personally, but she should know if she's a Christian, her acts are perverse. And if she's trying to make an excuse for her actions, and she's saying, "Oh, these actions are okay," then I would say that's somebody evidently is not in the Lord. But that's somebody who's trying to make an excuse for sin, which is what atheists do. Um, but I don't know this person. You know them more than me, uh, so yeah. I mean, so what we're entailing, what's going to be entailed in this sort of theorizing is, what can a maximally great being do? Well, think of the properties of God: omnipresence, right? The ability to be everywhere, right? My argument would be simply this: minds, the concept of mind exists outside of the mind. Yes, the concept of a mind exists outside of the mind. You know, whether you like or not, you know, what you consider to be a mind exists outside of the mind, which means you don't have to think about there being a mind. It's just properly basic. It's properly basic that you woke up, you brushed your teeth. That's properly basic. If you're going to Alvin Plantinga's work, it's properly basic, all right? And so, because we don't have to ascertain whether minds function anymore, we can just assume they do, right? But if we assume they do and minds exist outside of ourselves, then we've got to ask ourselves a question: is it possible that a mind exists beyond all minds, and that mind is constantly observing all minds? Is that possible? If it's impossible, then you have to give a logical argument how it breaks the law of non-contradiction. How does that break the law of non-contradiction? Again, I'm formulating this in my mind as I talk to you. It's stuff that I've had to think about. That, the question of God doesn't disappear just because you say, oh, well, there is no God. Because, if the question of God was something so illogical, like a square circle or a married bachelor or still tissue, then we wouldn't really talk about it. It would be relegated in the realm of impossibility. But it can't be impossible. Well, sure, Merit, in order for us to be gods, we have to be able to conceive of a world in which we can experience every single person's thoughts simultaneously. Now, can you conceive of that world? Because again, we're leaning on a concept of God, or what God is. So if we're going to claim that every single person's God, one, we've got to conceive of a world in which we're able to manipulate matter. And I'm not talking about through scientific means or through various principles, through connecting dots. I'm talking about by our own will. Oh, sure, that's simply not the case. What's your argument for that? They're saying consciousness resonance. What's the argument for that? It would be a logical contradiction then, because then we're talking about all human minds being the creator of all human minds. You know, if you say that we are our creators, then why are we explain how, for example, why we would be time bound to bodies of our own choice and be grounded in bodies that cannot manipulate matter. And what properties, what great maker properties do we have that suggest that we are gods? All these things are important. That's why the monotheistic understanding of God makes more sense than the idea of you being God. We were brought from an alien race. That seems like an assumption. You've not proved it. How do you know? Where did that revelation come from? Who gave it to you? Where did that come from? You are God of you think you are, say you are. Well, no, because what we're defining God as is a transcendental, maximally great being who is able to create all things, including, everything that exists from his own volition. We're talking about that God which is outside of time, space, and not confined by time, space, and matter. You know, so what you're talking about then is not God. You're talking about a limited being. Yeah, I mean, brother, I got this from Butlins, dude. Like, people can wear a cross. So I mean, there's been people who've worn non costumes have been getting down and doing mad stuff. Um, I would say that's a genetic fallacy that you're making. So you're saying because there are people who are calling themselves Christians, and because there's people who are wearing crosses doing bad things, that therefore means that Christianity is bad, and that's not how this works. That's a genetic fallacy. And a genetic fallacy is, well, it appears to be the case that whatever is coming from this thing um, is therefore the cause of this thing. Or sorry, whatever bad influences are coming out of this thing seems to be coming from this thing. Um, I'm probably explaining the genetic fallacy wrong. Uh, no, religion is not control. So, in what part is Christianity manipulating you right now? So, for example, the curriculum. In school, I was taught evolution. In school, I was taught pan religiosity, especially during RE. The Bible doesn't teach pan religiosity, it teaches the opposite. The Bible teaches that God created the heavens and the earth. The schools don't teach that. So if there was going to be some sort of brainwashing or control, it would start early. Well, think about it. Who are the most susceptible to brainwashing? Children, because adults, of course, have learned, they study, but children are the most susceptible. Why is it the case that schools are not teaching the idea of creationism? Why is it not the case that schools are teaching the idea of Christianity being the only truth? Because it's not brainwashing. You know what a brainwash is? Evolution. That's a brainwash. Let me tell you the truth. That's brainwashing. Evolution is brainwashing. How was God made? Well, we wouldn't say God was made. We would say he's necessary. So the maximally great being cannot be made because then that would be a contradiction. Because then there would have to be another maximally great being. And the problem with that is, that would negate the idea of God being the sufficient cause of all causes. So what we're talking about is grounding here. We're talking about imagine you're swimming in an ocean or you're swimming in a pool. At the bottom is going to be ground that holds the water up. Or imagine you visit a coliseum or a temple. You get to the top of the temple, you're going to be held up by pillars. Right, that's going to be the ground. Right, so we can already establish that there's some ground to things. And what we're saying is God is the be all and end all. He's the great making cause of all things that exist. And so you can't say something created him because then you'd have to say there's something that created him and then ad infinitum. And the problem with that is it won't work because then he won't be the great making God. So what we're saying is what we're conceptualizing is the idea of the most maximal great being. You can't say there's anything beyond that. So that's not going to work. Um, Look at the Egyptian pantheon. Well, I mean, the issue with pantheons. Wait, one, it's a myth. Two, I mean, obviously it's a myth, but two, so the idea of demigods, as we're understanding it, fall and collapse when one realizes that most of these gods are supposed to be gods of different objects, but God has to be the sufficient cause of all things. So, sorry, the efficient cause of all things. So, if that's the case, then those beings outside himself can't be gods. There can't be a god in the sky and yet God be God. That doesn't make any sense because God has to be the creator of the sky. Uh, it's not about judging anybody; it's about being logical. I'm saying if it poses a logical contradiction to say that God, in his great making properties, isn't the first cause of all reality, then produce an argument. And if you haven't been able to produce an argument, then already you've just shown us that really you're not going to be able to deal with the idea of God's existence. And this is what I say about atheists, and I'm not generalizing it because I've spoken to a ton of them. Is that a lot of atheists don't really think about the idea of God. They just assume God's non-existence without ever trying to disprove the existence of God. So first, you have to ascertain. Well, I mean, is the where where in the atheist worldview, if there is no God, how can you make sense of minds functioning? How can you make sense of logic? How can you make sense of reason? How can you make sense of experience? How do you know you're experiencing the world as it is? I mean, you say so, but that's very important because if you don't know whether you experience the world as it is, but you're assuming that, what are you doing? Well, you're having a faith-based assumption about how the world works. Well, you who attack Christians for having a faith, or at least say that it's fairy tales, you now have the burden of proof to produce, you know, the facts of your claim about the universe. How do you know I exist? Oh, because we have brains is not an answer. Like I say, because I have brain, God exists. That wouldn't be a logical argument. The reason why is because you're just assuming that your brain's functioning without ever giving evidence for it functioning properly. So all you're doing is just telling me what you believe. And I can tell you what I believe. I believe Jesus Christ is God. Is that enough evidence for you to believe Jesus Christ is God? Well, a smarter man would say no, that isn't. So then why is your claim that your brain working a good enough response then? Well, how do you know I am talking? How do you know I'm not AI? How do you know I wasn't created by, you know, a supercomputer and placed into your memory? How do you know you're observing me? How do you know that I'm not you and you're in a daydream? There is a lot of things you need to think of. You've ever watched Fight Club, right? You know, and I do this all the time. I'm not saying human beings don't have, actual physical experiences. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that, you need to give a reason as to why these things exist. So if you've ever watched the film Fight Club, the protagonist or the main character of the film, he has an imaginary friend by the name of Tyler Durden. And Tyler Durden, he doesn't know whether that's his imaginary friend or not. So Tyler Durden starts this Fight Club and he's all cool and all blonde and weird and stuff. And basically the main character is like some loser jobber. And so at the end of the film, you actually get this reveal that, oh no, this is actually just a guy's mind and Tyler Durden does not exist. How do you know that I'm not Tyler Durden? Yes, but again, Kenshu, Kenshiro, when you say I use logic and reason, what are you doing when you lose your logical reason? You're using your mind. How do you know your mind is giving you a valid interpretation of the universe? It all goes back to your mind having to give proof. Where's the proof for your mind? Is the question I'm asking. Mr. and Mrs. Westy, you're just moving. I haven't ruined it at all, man. I just gave one example, but if you watch it, it would actually be a great movie for you to watch. So, it is. So when you say, well, I use logic and reason, that just tells me what you're using. It doesn't tell me how you know it's functioning properly. If I said, oh, well, I use the computer to come to the determination that, Minecraft blocks, create Minecraft houses, that doesn't tell me what the code is or who created the computer in the first place. That just tells me you're using the computer. Uh, oh, you've already watched it. Fair enough. I think about all this stuff all the time. Although I'm not like some genius, like because I wouldn't claim to be. The reason why I think about it is because I think there's too many arguments for God, and I'll say it strongly. I think there's too many arguments for God to be rejected by anybody. And this is why the Bible says that nobody has an excuse, because I just feel like, you know, you have to be intellectually lazy not to want to answer those questions. It's not a hard thing to be like, okay, well, how did I get here? Who am I? How do I know that I exist? This is not a hard thing to ask yourself. And if you're assuming these things and saying, well, I have faith that I exist, well, now you've got a challenge on your hands, because then you can't say logically that those who have a faith in that which transcend us are doing something that is, you know, incredulous. Sorry, not incredulous, ridiculous. You ain't Tyler Durden Morpheus, maybe. Maybe I'm Morpheus because I keep waking up once. No, I'm joking. I'm not gonna gloat, man, because the Lord will punish me. I'm none of those people. I'm just a servant of our Lord. But in many ways, right, yeah, just like Morpheus, right? He goes into the Matrix, and what he does is he's basically like just telling Neo, like, look, like, you need to wake up a bit, son. And so that's what I'm really doing, is I'm telling people that the Matrix is here, and you have to think outside the box instead of remaining within the box and constrain yourself. And that's what I'm telling atheists to do. Um, Somebody said, "Why are you talking to me?" Or I don't know. People need to stop believing in a man in the sky. Well, I don't think any Christians believe in a man in the sky. We would understand that God exists in the third heaven, so that wouldn't be the sky. And obviously, God, in terms of his, atemporality, he exists everywhere, every single time. He's not, of course, identical to everything, but he's not bound to space. And so already you're giving me a straw man of what I believe. I don't believe that. Every time an atheist says, "Oh, sky daddy," it's like they're assuming a worldview which they haven't substantiated. That's not what I believe. That's what you believe. It's not what I believe. That's what you believe. And if you believe in a sky daddy, that's up to you. But I mean, I don't believe in that. Try to link science with God. Well, I say no, because in order to do any sort of concept of science, and again, I've mentioned before, I was just going back. In order to conceptualize science, you need to do what? You need to have an idea of wisdom. You need to be able to use your mind. Well, I mean, then you'd have to do philosophy. That's what Anthony Flew notes. And Anthony Flew used to be an atheist. He's actually a philosopher. He used to be an atheist. He became a deist because he saw there was more evidence for God than not for God. Um, so he writes a book called "There Is a God," and you can actually see it there in that book. He describes the idea of God. C.S. Lewis and Charles Spurgeon. I mean, people are saying why. So why think of anything? Why do anything? If you conceptualize there is no God, then why do anything? Why exist? If the whole reason for your existence is just to, well, have fun and then die anyway, why not just speed up the process? You could say why to all of these things, or we could start thinking, well, why am I here? What made me here? These questions won't go. And so the question of God doesn't go, it's because you don't like God. The question of God still exists. Well, it's not that science is not there yet. You see, this is the faith-based assumption of those who are atheists. It's like, well, scientists will eventually discover God, or scientists will eventually discover this or that. And yeah, that's an assumption, sure. That's a faith. That's a religion. Why? Because it's an expectation of the things not seen. It's hoping in and relying upon something to give you all of this understanding information eventually. But what are you hoping in? Well, you're hoping in, well, lab coats. But the problem with science is it boxes off actual investigation because it limits, you know, it basically dogmatizes and limits the field of discovery. If you can only use science in the sense that you can only use that which is quantifiable and testifiable in this world, you're not going to know what's outside of it. Like, for example, Anthony Flew gives an example of, this tribe that discovers um, some radio equipment. They discover radio equipment and they find that the radio equipment is toxic to them. So then basically what happens is the scientists of the tribe start pulling it apart, and they realize it's got ions and diodes in it, and it's got a little circuit board. And what they say is, oh, well, the sounds must be coming from the board itself. So the board must be making the sounds. It can't be that the sound is external. And so then a mage, a spiritualist, comes and says, well, hold on, guys, what if the radio is picking up sounds of real people that actually exist? And they all look at this, the scientists all look at the spiritualists and they say, well, that's a bit dumb, isn't it? No, we can see that it's coming from the radio. So therefore the radio is making the sound. There can't be any sound external to it. So what are the scientists doing? They're basically saying, well, if we can't observe it within the bounds of our, earthly realm, then it cannot possibly exist. And that's not science. And the science in its purest form is to seek to discover things. It's not to seek to denigrate the idea of discovery. And yet, what scientists are doing nowadays, especially more so those atheists that are following science, is they're like, well, denigrating scientific discovery. Well, they can't. They can't prove what initiated the Big Bang. And so this is why science itself it's a way of discovering stuff, but it's not the only way. Is what I would say. And I think if somebody says it's the only way, well, then the burden of proof is on you, because now you have to produce proof how it can be necessarily no other way but the scientific method. You see, so I know it hurts people's minds, but it's necessary to try and discover truth with the resources we have. And a lot of people say, well, it's all I know, right? But it's not all you know. You know philosophy. You know that love exists. You know that I mean, I hope you know that your mother loves you. You don't need to rip open your mum's brain to do any sort of innate study or to measure some sort of Bunsen burner, type chemical reactions in order to know your mother loves you, because you have faith. And this is where I close. Faith is not a bad thing. Faith is a good thing. Everybody has faith. Anybody who says they don't have faith is a liar. Every single person has faith. But some don't have faith in that which is ultimate. Some have faith in themselves, and they make themselves that which is ultimate and necessary in the universe. And what I'm saying is the atheist needs to be open to humility and saying, well, maybe it's the case that I'm not that which is ultimate. Maybe there is something external to myself which is ultimate and necessary. These things are important. And if we don't do that, then we're just going to be left to dogma and limiting scientific inquiry. And this is why I would end it by saying, look, scientific scientific inquiry is stifled by atheistic dogmatism, because atheists are dogmatic. They are ardently religious and dogmatic. And so in order to do further scientific inquiry, we need to free ourselves of atheism and actually seek to be skeptical of the skeptics. You understand? Uh, but yeah, any questions before I dock out? It's like 38 minutes I've been walking and I've got to go back and do something. I'm literally wasting time out here. Ugh. So any questions before I dock out? I know sometimes what I can say can fly over people's heads. If you want, replay the video again and really just listen to me. Just hear me out. There's no harm in hearing me out. You know. So the question is there more people in heaven and hell? I don't know. I know that Revelation mentions an innumerable number of people in heaven, but we don't know really how many people in heaven. That's something that we revealed, but we know it's John says it can't even be numbered. You know. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Westy, verses are important, and I always mention Romans 1:20, which says, For since the beginning of creation, his invisible attributes have clearly been seen through what has been made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And so that, if you think about everything I've said, that's basically summed up in that verse. Because you know, God is obviously far more intelligent and greater than I am. Speaking of Jesus Christ, if they go to hell, would they ever make it back? No. I mean, we've got the example in Luke 16. Nobody who is on that side of the chasm can go over to this side, and nobody can go over to that side from this side. I mean, if you think Abraham's bosom is paradise, well, paradise is where those go who trust in Christ, and Hades is where people go who don't. And that place is one of torment. I won't be able to describe the torment for you. I don't want to get things wrong, but we know it's torment. We don't know it. We don't believe happiness exists outside of Christ. And God allows us who live in this world to momentarily feel his love, but that doesn't mean we always will. And eventually, those of us who do not trust him will eventually have to pay the toll for their sins. Do you seriously believe in the concept of hell, heaven? Yes, I do. Again, I earlier spoke about logical contradictions. I don't see a logical contradiction between saying we exist and dimensions exist and there being other dimensions possible. I don't see any logical contradiction with that. So heaven and hell does exist in as much as eternal life exists. Well, I would say that's all grounded in Jesus Christ of Nazareth. You see, 2,000 years ago, he truly existed. He died, he rose again to give us eternal life, so that by faith we can enter into his kingdom. If we trust he is who he says is, if we trust in his word, if we trust in who he is, then we will be saved. And so he offers that salvation to all men. And he uses to this day vessels for his glory, all throughout the country and all throughout the planet. And I believe God is calling everybody here to repent, including myself, But more so importantly, I believe God is calling you atheists to repent and believe in the gospel. Yeah, of course. But with an atheist appealing to the Bible, they're not going to accept it. But then they have to. I just go into the more external of the atheists and I say, well, disprove the idea of external universes. Disprove the idea of there being, other worlds and the possibility of other worlds. Yeah. And then we can get onto the Bible if they accept the Bible as authoritative. Because then, when they've accepted the Bible as authoritative and Jesus Christ as Lord, the Lord who grants us mercy will guide them, if he so wills, to his truth and seal them with his Holy Spirit. That's the kind of assurance we have. You know. And again, you don't have to be perfect to go to heaven. Trust me. It's not about you being perfect, it's about who is perfect. Yeah. If you know, you know. Oh well. Uh but anyway, I'm gonna go. I may do a TikTok live later on. Depends. But yeah. If anybody's got more questions, let me know. I'll be taking questions later on. Anyway, God bless. Take care.